The topic of today's shiur is rebis when it comes to banks. Obviously in Shulchan Aruch you're not going to find any reference to banks or to these shilas. And the shuvas which discuss banks, the shilas that are connected to banks and rebis, some of them have elements which appear in Siman Kuf Samach Sif Zayin, which is why, since you're around that area, most of you either learned it or are going to learn it the next day or so. So I decided, in the next few days, to give a shiur on this topic. Next week, we want to start already Kuf Samach Aleph. So whoever is not up to speed, get up to speed. The Ramah in Siman Kuf Samach Sif Zayin says, Yeshayim the mutu Yisrael lemer lechavere Yisrael lech vehalve limois miploin Yisrael beribis. Umuter losses acharibis l'shleich lavirloi. You could, one Jew, Reuven, could tell Shimon, go and borrow money from Levi. Now, Shimon is the one who's going to borrow the money from Levi, even though he's borrowing on behalf of Reuven, but Shimon is the one who is dealing with Levi, and the shtar is being signed obviously by Shimon and Levi, not Reuven, and is done with ribis. And then when it comes to time to pay, then the Reuven could give Shimon the ribis to pay Levi for this loan. Like the Torah only prohibited if it goes straight from the loiva to the malve, or as his representative, that there's a loan between Reuven and Levi, direct loan, and then either the money gets sent one of the times, both of the times through a shliach, that's awesome. But if it goes through fully a third party, then it's not a problem, because there's essentially two loans over here. Reuven tells Shimon, go borrow money. Shimon borrows money from Levi, so it's one transaction. He doesn't take, now when it comes to pay, and he commits himself to pay ribis. So now Shimon is not the one who's going to actually pay the ribis to Levi. And Reuven is not paying any ribis to Levi either. So there's no isser over here. The ribis lav hashliach and no isser shum isru, the ribis lav hideyu, the shliach doesn't do anything wrong because it's not his money. If you can say shluchas shalom k'moisen, in this scenario is no shlechet v'alaveda, and therefore it's fine. This whole ein shlechet v'alaveda is based on the shita of Rashi, which the Beis Yosef right away disagrees with. The Shach is mechazik the shita of Rashi over there in Sif Zayin, and that this concept of shluchas in this scenario is very important to this shiur, which is why I mentioned it, emphasizing it. Which is exactly what I'm doing now by posting this video on YouTube. Like you could be soymech on this leis atzeirech. Mikol mokem. Im aloyve kibel amois ba'atzim in amalve. If he only gets the money, if he gets the money directly, but then he sends the money with the shliach, it's awesome. If the shliach of the malve lends to the loive with ribis, and he makes a shtar al shem malve, it's also very important to remember, because it's going to be relevant to the bank discussion, that he writes a shtar on the name of the malve, so the shliach's name is not mentioned anywhere. Regardless of whether the Meshaleach knows what's going on. The moment the Shliach signs a document on behalf of the Malva and gives the money to the Loive, and then the Loive pays ribis, even though it all went to the Shliach and the Malva didn't even know about it, it's still considered Asur. The main thing is you look at the shtar was with the name of the Malva, and it becomes a problem. But that is the halacha in Shulchan Aruch. So now we're going to jump into the bank scenario and see what it is. A person invests money in the bank, buys stocks in the bank. The banks are owned by Yidden. Banks are owned by Yidden and Goyim. You invest in an Israeli bank, invest in an American bank that has Yidden and Goyish owners, or a person deposits money in the bank. And then the bank goes, and how the bank operates is the money that the deposits, that's the money that gets lent out. That's how you get interest on your deposits. So now, if a Yid goes, first of all, you're allowed to invest in such a bank if a Yid is going to borrow from the bank. In America, you invest in Chase Bank. There's definitely going to be a Yid who's going to be borrowing from Chase Bank down the line. And what's your definition as an investor, or one who deposits money in the bank? And what's your definition as a borrower? If you're a Yid who borrows, and there might be Yidden who own that bank. So obviously, if you're talking about a private bank that's owned by an Arab sheikh in Dubai, you don't have to worry about it, because probably means there can't be an Arab, because they also don't hold the ribis. They also have, for sure, a private guy owns a bank, and it's not a problem. Not to borrow, not to deposit, maybe, because if a Yid is going to borrow, it becomes an issue. So you have investing in the bank, depositing in the bank, borrowing from a bank. What's the definition? And the biggest question is, what's the definition of a bank? Is a bank its own person? Is a bank a collection of the investors? Is a bank a collection of the depositors? Like what is this bank? Okay, so there's a concept which is called a corporation. Corporation is the new version of a partnership. Used to be that 10 people would decide they want to go into a business. 10 people, each one will put in money into an account, into a joint account. 2 people, 3 people, 10 people become partners. They would do business. Some people would do the work. Some people will bring the money, whichever way they set up the partnership. And then comes the end of the day, they would split the profits. If there was debts, you go after the partners. The partners are not independent of the corporation, of the partnership. If the business lost money, the business borrowed $100,000, this partnership, and the business went bankrupt, and there's 10 partners, it would go after all the 10 partners. Right? In 1844, the English people developed the concept of a corporation. It means you don't have to have the first, it took some time, it took about 15 years till they figured it out, from 1844 to 1860, something like that. And they figured out the concept of a corporation. They created a new metzius. First, they started something called a corporation. What is a corporation? That all the partnerships, all the people who become partners are now not each one in their own capacity. Now we have a tzibur of 10 shutfim. We have a new gather, a metzius called a corporation. And in that corporation, you have 10 people who invested. And therefore, what does it mean? If somebody has a claim against the corporation, doesn't have to send summons to court to all the 10 and chase all of them down. Since the corporation, and the corporation has to respond. The corporation has the 10 people who own it as parts of it. However, at that stage, there's still anybody who was a partner was responsible for the losses. So if you took the corporation, which is its own metzius, to a court case, and the corporation lost, and they had to split the losses, so each of the partners had to pay his share of the losses or the debts.
So what changed with this law?
That the first step towards creating a corporation created now, you don't have to chase 10 people, but there is a concept called a corporation, which is independent gather, and you have 10 people who are responsible for the corporation, who profit from the corporation, but the corporation is own goof. Then 10 years later, they created the Limited Liability Act, Kishmoy Kein Hu, limited liability, which is that the partners only have a responsibility for only up to the certain amount that they invested into. There's a certain amount that they're responsible for. Still, if there's debts of the company, it's still their responsibility, but it's not forever. If the company borrows money more than its assets, more than they invested, then there's much less than it. And then they finally figured it out a year later, 1856, that the concept of a corporation, the way we know it today, that it's mamish, its own metzius. And each person who puts in money has a vote. It's about 30 pages long, that 1856 law, and it explains to you everything. Each person has a vote. The corporation is its own metzius, and the partners have to put in money into the corporation, and the corporation takes out money. But if something goes wrong in certain scenarios, the people who invested in the corporation are not responsible for those debts. So God created a new concept in halacha, shaylas in halacha. The goyim set up corporations now. They set up banks. They set up companies which produce beer. They set up companies which sell treifes, shutfes, and a bunch of other wineries, whatever it is. Yain Nesach, Nevelas treifes, working on Shabbos. All the isurim you can think of are all in whichever corporation you invest in. Shaila is, what becomes you as an investor? What's your role in this corporation? Are you a partner? You're not a partner. If an aveda is done by the corporation, the bank lends money with ribis, as you, as one of the owners of the corporation, one of the investors, are you over an aveda? If this company, if you invest in a wine company of Yain Nesach, you make profits from it, it's a different shayla. It's a shayla of Isur Hana. If a company works in Shabbos, are you doing an aveda by it or not? So there's a few tshuvas that discuss it, which is what I printed to you. The reason I chose specifically...
Would this question be with depositing also, or just...
Also depositing, if depends what the definition of a personal deposit is. The way the shiur is structured is around 3 letters from the Rebbe, one that's in the Rishimis, one that is in... and 2 that are in the Kiddush. The tshuvas that I chose over here are mainly the ones that the Rebbe quotes in the Shimis and the Kiddush, because that's how you're going to understand what the situation is. I'm going to start from the tshuvas, and we're going to get to what the Rebbe writes about it. So, pretty much the first person who discusses this topic is the Mario Alevi, Bischok Aaron Halevi Ittinger. He's probably the first one who discussed it that I found. He has one tshuva which I didn't quote, where he discusses why investing in a chametz, when you're an investor in a chametz beer company, you're not over bal yiro bal yimotza. What?
That came from...
Could be. Mm-hmm. And in Chelik Beis, he discusses ribis in a bank. He's talking about the bank that is managed by goyim. The goyim are the managers of the bank, and he says it's not a problem. In such a scenario, it's not a problem whether the yid is an investor in the bank, whether the yid borrows from a bank. Regardless whether you're the one who's investing in the bank and then the yid is going to borrow, or you're borrowing from the bank and the yid owns it, the goyim runs it, it's not a problem. And he starts with a bunch of yesodus that he brings in that tshuva, which is the first one that I printed for you in this booklet. He says, first of all, first point is, the director of the bank is not your shliach. If you're the owner, he's not the shliach of the guy who owns the stocks to lend money to a Jew. He's not a shliach of the malva. He's not a shliach of the loive, who's a yid, to borrow money from the owners of the bank. Why is that? Because neither the malva never spoke with the one who runs the bank. And he explains how does it work to make a loan. He has to explain, because it wasn't so common in the banks in those days. He says the one who wants to buy the stocks brings his money, gives it to the cashier, and then the cashier has the money. The one who holds the cashier, the one who holds the one who controls, not the cashier, the one who's in charge of the treasurer. Sorry, the treasurer. And then there's the one who runs the bank. The one who runs the bank works out a deal with the borrower, and he tells him, he makes all the conditions, taking to borrow the money. And he signs with the borrower. Then the borrower doesn't get the money from the director of the bank. The one who operates the bank has to go and get the money from the treasurer, because the money is sitting by the treasurer. So you have 2 goyim over here. You have the treasurer who has the money, and you have the one who who worked out the deal with you. 2 separate people. And then the loive, he gets the loan from the bank. The loan, he owes the money to the bank. The loan is between him and the bank. It's on the name of the bank. important to know why he points out on the name of the bank. Because, like we said before, the main thing in Shulchan Aruch is if the shtar is written on the name of the malveh, then we don't care if the malveh knows about it or not. Over here, it's written on the name of the bank, not on the name of anybody else. And the biggest raya is that you're borrowing from the bank is if the borrower is going to default on the payment, who's going to go after him? Who's going to go after him? The bank. The stockholder can't go and ask the bank for a paper, a list of all the people who defaulted on the loans in the last year and go after them. The owners don't have the right to. The bank is the one that's going to go after the people who default on their payments. Yeah, what's your relationship to the bank? You're a stockholder. You're not a director of the bank. What's your rights to go after that person? And the money's going to go to the bank. And if they win in court, the money's going to go to the bank. Right? So you have the bank, the way it seems like from this Maria Levi, that the bank is its own independent entity. The independent entity which borrows money, which lends money, which owns money, which sues people, which everything. It's all its independent entity. It's not a sum of its parts. This bank, this partnership is not a sum of its parts. It's its own independent metzius. It's a guf b'fnei atzmai. As he explains that, he says it is bechlal no shlichus over here. He says you don't even have to come to the ein shlech l'dvar aveda, which is the concept of ein shlech l'dvar aveda, because the bank never became the shliach of elam l'naseh shluch l'klal. The bank never became the shliach of the investor, never became the shliach of the borrower. He says,
And if, as an effect, that the bank will default on you if everybody defaults on the bank and some banks collapse, right?
Right.
It's not. Doesn't.
So you invested in a bank which collapsed. You lost your
Let's say
money.
you didn't invest in the bank, but you may open the savings account.
You open a savings account,
You
yeah.
also open the savings. The fact that because of him,
You lost, yeah. Who are you going to go after? You're going to call to Bezdin, you're going to go to Bezdin and say that I have an agreement with the bank, I'm supposed to make a certain amount of money. I know you borrowed from that bank, and I know you're a yid, so I'm schlepping you to Bezdin. And I want you to pay me what I lost. I lost whatever, I was supposed to get 3% a year, and I ended up losing money because of the crash. And I searched on Acris, and I found that your house, you borrowed money from Citibank, and I have a stocks with Citibank. Go to Bezdin. I want to sue you for the money that you owe Citibank because I have a chashut from Citibank. It's not going to fly, not legally, and halachically, probably not. Even if you it's a poitike. What is it on? Maybe it's an apoitike when you borrow money. It's only a specific. It's listed specifically to only take from a certain place.
Or is
Who's going to take
is
from?
it the whole right here that
It's a separate thing.
only works with 3 people, and since this is not a person, it stops the chain of the chain?
No, because who owes who? Nobody owes anybody anything. There was never, the bank doesn't owe you anything. It owes you what you invested. But you invest in the bank, which is its own independent entity, and you went according to the laws of the land, and it became its own gather. So you invested with the bank, and then the bank lent to somebody else, and that's it. You can't go after that person.
Also, if you call the money, if you want to call it the money, it's not dependent. If, let's say they take that money that you gave,
Yeah, and they lend it out.
that guy didn't pay back, then you're getting money from whatever, from someone else.
Because the bank legally has to have a certain amount of reserves to cover that.
So, there's no connection between you and the guy.
That's today's day and age, yeah. No, I love Dafka. It always was like that. But all the money gets mixed. We're going to get to it later. One of the different shoe we discussed.
Your deposit can be lost.
Huh?
It's insured.
Today it's insured by the government
It's insured by someone else. Maybe the bank can lose that money and not.
and not pay you anything. Yeah. He says, according to the Taz, to become a shliach, you have to have the shliach is borrows from one person and lends to the other person. It has to be a malva and a loiv over here. And you don't have it. Why? Because the bank director and the treasurer, both of them, do not have any liability to the people who invested money in the bank. they have zero liability. Obviously, unless they did something wrong, complete negligence, pshia, something else. But if not pshia, they're not responsible. They don't have no arvas, no achrayas on it, so that they're not the owners. All they do is they are in charge of distributing the money that the bank has. So they're not a loive or a malva. So it ends up being that they're not responsible to the loive, they're not responsible to the malva. All they're doing is they're taking money from one place, moving it to another place. And the bank is the one that decides how to do money. And the person if the person doesn't pay, the bank goes after him. And if the owner of the stocks doesn't get his payment, he can't go after direct to the bank. He has to go after the bank, the concept of a bank. So then he says, Bichlal, because there's no shluchus, so therefore, because there's no concept of shluchus, so therefore there's no problem, even if the menal of the bank are goyim. There's no shluchus lak. And it's better that the Bichlal concludes it's better that it's goyim, and even better if the bank director gets a nice bonus at the end of the year for all the loans he successfully produced that year for the bank that generated profit. Because then what the guy is doing is not only is he working for the stockholders, which then you have a shaila maybe, he's actually working for himself. Because the more loans he generates, the more money he's going to make. So adated nafshika of it.
He's looked at as the malva here, he's looked at as the one facilitating the loan.
If he's looked at as one facilitating the loan without his money, it's not his own money, then he's doing it for himself. He's not doing it on the sake of the Jew. And his conclusion is whether the ones who run the bank are Jews or the ones who run the bank they're going. B'chol gavni mutar l'chatchila, it's always mutar. That's the Maria Levi. Let's go to the other extreme, the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Kitzur Shulchan Aruch you have in page 285. In here, page 285 in the book. It's almost by that. Kitzur Shulchan Aruch in Simen Samachay, which is Hilchas Ribis, Seif Chavches, where he says over there that he says that Lochin b'mokim sheyesh kvutzas mois, in the middle. He says if it's page 285 in this book that I printed for you. Seif Chavches. Towards the middle, he says when you have a kvutzas mois, a group of money, which is a savings place. Sheyesh Yisraelim chalokim, which is aktien, which is stocks. Bohem v'Yisraelim lovim misham beribis, and then Jews borrow from it with ribis. Af al pi shamemunim heima einam Yehudim, mikol mokim nearly the isur gomer. Even if the ones who run it are goyim, it's isur gomer. The lochein osur litin shamois. You're not allowed to deposit any money in these banks. Ki shema yalva Yisrael sheina hogun. Because maybe somebody's going to borrow from that. The Jew is going to borrow from it. And you as a Jew are not allowed to borrow from it because maybe a Jew put the money into there. He's completely oyster, the other end. Can't invest, can't borrow, can't even deposit. And his words is Asur litin l'shamois, he makes it into Isur Gomer. It's like Shulchan Aruch. After the Shulchan Aruch was printed the first time and the second time, the box of Shulchan made comments on it. He edited and added stuff. That was called Pa'asa Shulchan. Over here, it's printed as Lechem upon him, but it's an edition of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. And that's an edition which was printed later. And over here, he says, towards the middle, he says, even though you have over here also in this bank, it's not only owned by Jews. It's not a bank that every single person deposited money is a Jew and every single one who borrowed money is a Jew. We're talking about you have people who bought stocks for goyim. You have people who put money in their goyim. You have people who borrowed money from their goyim. Right. So therefore, you would think that it's less of a problem. It's mutter because all the money is mixed together. It says no. Taz v'shach kos v'shem ribas deraisa. Taz and shach, they make this into a ribis deraisa when it's goyim. With deraisa lo yamrin breira. When it comes to deraisa, we can't say the concept of breira. You can't pick and choose and say that I am Jew when I invested money, being that there's yidden and goyim all over in this bank. So the money that I invested into the bank was lent only to goyim. Breira was lent only to goyim, and the ribis that the goyim paid comes to me. The money that the yid is borrowing from the bank with ribis, he's borrowing from the goyim. Breira. But deraisa, you can't say breira. If it's deraisa, you can't make it into breira. Therefore, it's usher. So you can't say breira over here.
What happens if you stipulate it?
The what? What? You stipulate? If all the money is mixed up, how are you going to decide, determine which money is always the one big pocket?
Let's say you get K. These days, though, where everything sort of becomes numbers.
Right. I'm asking, like, what? If there'll be a bag and you would write over there that
Okay, so those days
that
were-
only Jews could borrow from your money, only goyim could borrow from your money.
I'm saying, so these days, stop.
Yeah.
These days where it's numbers, you give money and it goes onto the computer. And you
Yeah.
People cash like that. Odds are they're not getting your cash.
Right.
So could you stipulate a bet from the start?
That what? It's not.
The concept.
When you deposit money into the bank,
Yeah.
when you invest money into the bank, or when you borrow money.
Best.
When you invest, you write that you're making a condition with the bank that they're only allowed to lend your money out to goyim.
Yeah.
If the bank will be willing to do such a thing, I don't know. Can sein?
I know.
Can sein? I don't know. Right now, you were wondering why was this thing added in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch afterwards. The way the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch did was anything he got after his book was printed, it became very famous, and the Rabbanim would have comments on what he wrote. So this, if it was a good comment, he would either accept it or reject it. But this was the place where he put his comments in.
Did he praise it?
Do
Do you find that he was praised there?
No,
I'm saying before.
I didn't go through every single one, so I can't tell you about if it was chayzer in any single scenario of it. I don't know. Maybe he corrected in the guf. I don't know. But over here, he definitely was not chayzer. He actually doubled down on his position, and he continued as strong as he was before. And what he does with this line is farent for why he did not follow the other shittas. Who was the other shittas? The Baal Sholom was the posek in that generation. He had a communication with the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, with the person of Kitzur Shulchan Aruch regarding this topic. Bunch of letters, seems like a collection of letters between them went. Only one seems to be found, which is the one that you have over here in what I printed for you in the thin paper. And his conclusion is, before we get to the beginning, his conclusion is when you reprint your Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, delete this statement that he did. That's what Sholom wrote to him, and he did not only not deleted it, he added in the side Pasuk Shulchan why he doesn't agree with what Sholom wrote, but he didn't quote the Sholom because the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch is not a sefer which is made for all the arguments. He just added one line, and with that he explained why he doesn't hold of it. The sword of the Sholom was as follows. He says, first of all, according to Rashi, if it's done through a shliach, it's mutter. Yeah, and you could look through. So even if you're going to say that the owners of the bank are the shluchim, either of the borrower or of the lender, they're shliach. It's a shliach, so it's mutter, at least according to Rashi. And the next thing is over here, Bechal, you don't have to go into the whole discussion of shliach. Why? Because it's not clear that the Jews that are giving ribis is going to be going to the Jewish investors. Right? So that was something that he wrote.
Then we just said there's no barrier.
It's not clear.
I know, but isn't that burial?
Yeah, there is. That's what it seems like there is Breira. He takes the approach there is Breira, right? So this is all the summary of the Sholom. Huh? Right. He doesn't make it into that ice. Converts into we see later some convert into the Rabban. So the beginning of this tshuva of the Sholom Eshiv. So the whole first paragraph is pretty much he's reiterating everything that was already discussed. Then he comes to new things. So like a Shulchan Aruch person responding to him, that doesn't make a difference. So at the end of the day, the achrayus is on the malva. If it gets lost, who loses? The malva. If the bank collapses and this loan, because the loans didn't come back, who's going to lose? Who's going to lose? The malva. Yeah. Today the government, then the malva. So therefore. The achrayus on the malva, so there is a malva here, even though
So does that mean nowadays you would hold differently? If the government covers
You
your,
didn't have to cover everything.
government covers $100,000.
so are you allowed to lend to a bank under
I don't know,
100,000?
maybe. So then the Sholom Eshiv says, I don't care about this achrayus over here. That your reality is, even if you're going to go and you're going to write a shtar choiv on the name of the actual malva, and not in the name of the bank, you're going to write on the piece of paper that I'm lending you right now $500,000 to buy a house. The bank is going to write it, and the place where it says lender is going to put the name of the yid. It's still not aser. It's still not aser. He explains why is it over here, because over here it becomes this whole bank is looked upon as a shutfus, and all the money is mixed together. There's no way of determining whose money is who. So it could be that when the yid is borrowing, even if they put the yid's name on it, the yid is who's borrowing is really borrowing money that was given by the guy, and the guy who's and the yid who's investing, his money is really going to a guy. So you don't know because everything got mixed together, and therefore you don't even have to go into the concept of breira, because the whole concept of you can't say in breira b'deira isa because it's nothing to do with breira. Why? Because everything is mixed to begin with. Like this. I'll explain to you what it is. Something which is completely mixed together, the way he explains what breira is, something which is completely mixed together is not shaykh to have breira, because you can't define what belongs to who.
So one could you and one can't.
But you
What's the
can
two types of bread?
in a bank.
Huh?
You really
Yeah, it brings us over there. So he says,
You really can define because you can, end of the day, split up and find out which account has who has how much money in which account.
no, but once the money goes into the main thing, you can't know whose coin went from one to another. Money is money. So it becomes the whole shutfus. So b'meila, there's no way of knowing who gave the money to who. He's not saying that for sure it went from a yid to a guy, or for sure from a guy to a yid. He said it's not shaykh to know who it went, from who to who it went.
Why can't we see owns a percentage in each deal?
Somebody else responds on that. Yeah, somebody else mentioned that each maybe it goes with percentages. And he says, then he goes into the whole thing about that there's a tesis and tmura, that if before the isser got mixed together, it was originally mutter, and only when the isser came to being, it became mixed. So over there, we say yesh breira, even in the case of deraisa. And over here, being that when a bank lends money, there's no clarity if the money that came to the borrower came from a Jewish account, from a Jew to a Jew, and there's no way of being mevared because everybody's a shutef in it. So it's not shaykh. His maskana is shaykh isurim. It's not shaykh b'chal isurim. It's not the case. Even the people who disagree with Rashi and say there is shluchas, it has nothing to do with shluchas. There's nothing to do with shluchas, nothing to do with breira. There's no issue of breira over here. There's no shaykh to have breira over here. There's no shaykh of shluchas. And therefore, he tells them, when you reprint it, fix it. And he didn't listen to them. He reprinted it and wrote it differently. That's the Mahara. This is the Sholom Eshiv. And the reason I brought him first is because he's the one who argues in the Shulchan Aruch. Then we'll see. There's each one quotes the next one. So comes the Malam Shik, he brings the two svaras of the Sholom Eshiv. One, that according to Rashi, it's mutter through a shliach. And secondly, that you could say bread over here because the mixture, really you could say maybe it's b'chal not shaykh to have bread. But even if you're going to say there is bread in such a scenario, there is bread because the mixture happened afterwards. You can never know where the money came from. If it came from one person or from another, you could say bread in such a scenario that the money came from a yid to a goy, from a goy to a yid, and that's it. So the Imam Shik says, first, both reasons don't make sense to him. To say the second reason that the breda when it's all mixed is that the reason that when it's all mixed together you don't have this issue of breda. He says that they still have breda. He says that he brings a proof from Taisvez, and that Taisvez is only talking about according to the opinion that Yesh breda in the Deiraisa. So therefore, what's the chiddush that according to Taisvez in such a scenario there's Yesh breda? The we're talking about the people that say there's no breda. So it's not going to help you anything. And if everything gets mixed together, you want to say Ein breda. He says that according to Chasam Sofer, it only applies if everything was mixed together from the beginning. But if each person has his own defined part in this investment, and they just happen to be partners, but each one has a specific defined percentage of partnership, they just didn't divide the profits yet between the people, but each one has his own percentage. So even though right now all the money is mixed together, every single penny, each shutef has a part in it according to his percentage, and he's a shutef in everything.
If you don't have that money in the bank account, how do you have it?
What do you mean?
There's not enough pennies for every loan.
What I'm saying is, in each dollar that's lent, it's your shutef, so you have a chelik in that dollar that's lent. He flips it the other way around. The first one, according to the Sholom Eshiv, because everything is mixed together, you could say breda because there's no way of defining who it belongs to. He says no. Each person has his own defined shares of this company, percentage. Somebody will own 10% of the bank. Someone will own 0.0001% of the bank. Somebody will own 30% of the bank. And it depends how the bank is set up. Credit unions, maybe you are becoming a shutef. That's how the old banks used to be. Till today, you have credit unions in smaller banks. So he says in every single pruta, means in every single dollar, every shutef has an ownership in it, and he's a shutef in the whole thing. So every loan that goes out to, let's say you own 1% of the bank. There's 100 investors in the bank. You own 1% of the bank. And this bank now went and lent money to a yid, lent $1,000, $100,000 to a yid. You're 1%, right? So you're 1% owner of this bank. The bank lent $100,000 to a yid. So now, how much from your money went to this yid? $1,000. 1% of $100,000. $1,000 went to this Jew. He is going to be paying ribis on that money. So he's going to be paying a few $1,000 ribis. So on your $1,000 that you lent to this Jew as part of his package loan that comes from all the partners together, your 1% you lent to this Jew got $1,000 from you. He's paying back to the bank 1,005 or 1,010. So you made $10 of ribis on your $1,000.
But if the guy doesn't pay the ribs, he can't still run after, right?
Huh?
So you run after?
No, that's who's the policeman is not bichlal irrelevant. It's not bichlal part of this discussion according to the Madam Sheikh. He only looks at you're the owner by definition. Every loan that goes out of the bank, part of it is yours. Yeah, and you can't say it, and you can't say breda. And he adds even more. He says, even if you yourself would go and borrow money from the bank, you can't come and say that, what do you mean? I took my money. I invested, let's say I deposit $100,000 in the bank. I have a deposit with the bank. Then I go and I take a mortgage. And I default on my mortgage. And they go to court. And the person says, what do you mean? I'm an investor in the bank. I deposited money in the bank. So I'm not paying you. What do you mean? It's mine guilt. I put it into your account. So you come to me and you want to charge me for my money? What chutzpah do you have? Obviously, it's not going to work like that. You invested in it. When you borrow the money from the bank, you didn't take the entirety of your money. When you borrow $100,000 from the bank and you have $100,000 in the bank account and you went and took a mortgage for $100,000, your $100,000 is not coming from your bank account. A small percentage of it is coming from your deposit. The rest is coming from everybody else. Obviously, the bank is going to go after you and tell you, you have to pay back the money.
What happens if you put money in the bank, not in a CD or anything, just
Yeah.
have money that it incurs interest.
Yeah.
You can also take it out whenever you want.
What do you mean you take it out whenever?
You could withdraw your money whenever you want, but you're still.
Technically, you could. The bank doesn't have money for everybody to come at the same day.
I understand, but at the end of the day, there's no CS mom and there's no, you have your money when this person is borrowing money from you at the same time. That's how it's structured now.
Today it's structured like that, yeah.
So you can go to the bank and take the money.
But if you're an investor, Lavdafka, you can't always you can't buy a stock out right away, huh?
If you deposit money in the bank.
Deposit, it's different. But today's deposits are different because it's structured legally in such a way to make sure that the bankers are protected, and more importantly, the people are also protected. Today's deposit is very different than what it was then. But the stocks, if you own stocks in the bank, you could buy stocks in the bank. You can't sell them boy by yom. Maybe you could, but not, maybe if you have a big amount of stocks and somebody makes a run on a certain stock and the price are going to collapse, sometimes they'll stop trading on it. They're not going to want you to sell. Sometimes you become a partner in a certain company, you can't pull out before a certain date. If they're building a company, you can't pull out before a certain date. So now the Maram Shik, when he explains, he wants to explain how this corporation, how this business works. He says every person gives a certain percentage of stocks, and each one receives according to the amount that he gave. And the owners of the business, they decide up until when you could, by what's the earliest you could take out the money from the bank. You could sell the stocks, but you can't collect the money. And then the bank can hire somebody who's going to be the main person who's going to be in charge of giving out the money. At the end of every year, you get a report. Today, it's at the end of every quarter that there's earnings reports, and then you get on your stocks a certain amount of money. So what happens is over here is, in essence, every single person lent the money to the bank, and he borrowed money from the rest of the partners. Each person became part of this shutfus. He lent money to the partnership, a certain amount, and he borrowed money from the rest of the partners. And that's why at the end of the partnership, everybody gets a percentage. So therefore, he says in such a scenario, l'chayre should be aser, because every loan has a Jew's percentage in it, and every ribis that gets paid has a Jew. You're going to make money off the ribis.
So every bank also makes money itself, its own money. They make money off charging other people interest. So at a certain point, the loans that they give are also the bank's money itself. So it could be not even a percentage.
But who is that bank? If you don't look at the bank as an independent entity, the bank is the sum of its parts of its investors. So the fact that when you say the bank made money,
When a bank makes money, the investors don't make that money. The bank keeps that money.
yeah, but you as an investor who has
Pull
stock,
out that amount of money that the bank
you have stock, it belongs to you, it's your money. If the bank gets sold and there's a stock buy, a private person comes and buys the bank, you will get your shares of the profit. So then he asks, being that everybody's partners to each one, all of them are partners together, and all the money's together, and each one is a borrower and a lender at the same time to the rest of the people. So he says, what do we care if the money is already here, if the money was lent out, or the money wasn't lent out, if the money is mixed, or the money is not mixed. By definition, whenever money is given to somebody as a loan, the purpose is for spending the money. So therefore, it's as if the money was already gone, and the only thing is that this bank is meshubah to each one of them, and it becomes an apoytekim mefurish. An apoytekim mefurish means that if you owe money to somebody and you specifically state where you could collect the money from and from nowhere else. So this bank this entity, this bank, this collection of partners borrowed money from you. You invested money into the bank. You invested $100,000. So this group of investors borrowed $100,000 from the investor. And now that money is over, and it became now this group of investors is meshubed to pay the money back to me, the $100,000, the investor, the $100,000 that they borrowed. And the only way they could collect it from is from the bank. So now you're going to say, it's b'chlal not his. The money is not mine anymore. I lent it to the bank. The bank now owes, the shutfus now owes me as meshabed to me to pay me back the money. But I don't own the money anymore. My money already disappeared. I have a shtar choiv from the people to me. So maybe it's not my money anymore. And if it's not my money anymore, so you don't have an issue of rebis, because when the bank is giving out money, they're not giving my money. Because to me, with me, they have a deal. They owe me money. They're meshaber themselves to me.
What's it in a private person?
Huh?
If I loan someone living he does this, do I? Am I any?
What does it have to do with you? You lend somebody money without ribis.
Yeah.
He went and lent it to somebody else with ribis.
Yeah.
What does it have to do with you?
So why not? I did.
Huh? Here you are getting the ribis. In that case, you're not getting the
This
ribis.
is me to the bank.
Huh?
This is me to the bank.
Good. So that's what he says. That's what he's saying. No, maybe it's mutter. Because maybe it's mutter because it's not your money anymore. So it's not kaspacho, whatever. It's not kaspacho. It's not a problem. So what issue is there of ribis for the Yidden who are participating in the bank? And he says, really, ultimately, being that the achrayas of the bank will go under is on the Jews, of the owners. And Memele, you could say that it's like the money of the Jew, and he concludes, being that everything that the bank owns becomes meshubah to the people who invested money in the bank. And every single penny in this bank is meshubah to the Jews and to the Goyim. And therefore, and there's a Goyish part, there's Goyish partners over here also, so it's important. It's not a fully Jewish bank, it's a bank that has Yidden and Goyim. So every single penny over here that's in the bank is meshubah to you and meshubah to a Goy. So it's not anymore your money. So you don't have the issue of askas b'chalei. And therefore, he explains how now it becomes, if it becomes a shayla, it becomes a shayla of ribis d'Rabbanan. And if the one who runs the bank is a goy, there's no shluchas la'akum. He says, why? Because the one who runs the bank is a goy, there's no shluchas la'akum. And this din of no shluchas la'akum is with the b'seifrim. So the whole issue becomes the b'seifrim of the Rabbanan. It becomes issue of the Rabbanan, there's yesh breira, according to everyone. Only the Reis is not breira. So over here it becomes a shayla of the Rabbanan, ribis the Rabbanan, not a ribis the Reis, because it goes through a goy. Therefore, it's not an Isser, and there is Breira, and you could say that your money went to the guy, and the Yid who borrowed money, his money came from a guy, and it's all good, and he concludes that he wrote all this just to be Melamed Schus in the Yid. That's his conclusion. All this whole pilpul, how he explains why it's much to be Melamed Schus in the Yid. That was his outlook. Comes the Marasham, and he brings the Sholom Eshiv, the next on the line. He brings the Sholom Eshiv, and what the Manam Shik says in it. And this concept that every single penny that you put into the bank, a Jew has a part of it, and therefore you would think it's a shayla of Isseribis. And he says, you should just know, all the Heterim are only when the guy runs the bank. And also, he adds another condition, that the majority of the bank owners are Goyim. But if the one who runs the bank is a Jew, it's going to shelfen. If there's only one token guy that's a partner over there, you just take one guy and you tell him there's 100 Yidden who are investing and they just want to kasher all that Veda, so they take one guy and put him in there. Also doesn't work. Right? Even though according to the Manam Shik, it seems like it does work. Because the Manam Shik says, there's a guy and every penny, the guy is part of it, so it's not anymore your money. So according to Manam Shik, it seems that one guy is enough. But he says no. You have to have a majority guy. So therefore, the Marasham says when they made a bank in his city, he made a rule that anybody who wants to be part of this bank has to sign a shtan and best, everything to be according to Heteriska. And he says, that's for investing. If you want to borrow from a bank, the Marasham says you have to go to a big bank, which has a bunch of goyim who invested over there, and only then he relies on the svara of the Madam Shik that every penny has. You could say that every penny comes from, it gets mixed. The shibud is to the yid and to the goy, and therefore you're not high. Therefore, it's not really your money. And the guy is the one who's lending the money. Being that the guy is lending the money, so it becomes the rabbanon. Because the rabbanon is yesh breida, and your money didn't go to a guy, and the money you're borrowing didn't come from a yid; it came from a guy. Yeah, and he says, and this svara of this, that there is breida, that the Madam Shik says he doesn't like it so much. He says why? Because ultimately, being that there's still a chrayas under Yisrael, what does a chrayas mean? If the money goes, if the bank goes under, the yid is going to lose. The yid is going to lose his money. So even if the one who runs the bank is still a guy, it's still a shayla of rebbe, so it shouldn't be breida. So he says maybe you could say that being that all the money is meshubet to the bank, and the guy who runs the bank can do whatever he wants. So then even if it's b'achrayas Yisrael, it's still not an Isser. So he says that only applies when there's also money of goyim. And then the money of the guy is clear. You know what each penny of the guy is. And then you could say that it becomes as if they made a condition that every single loan that's going to come from a yid, every single loan that the yid is going to borrow is going to be from the money of a guy. But being that here everything is mixed, every single pruta of every single guy, of every single partner, every single pruta is owned by every single partner, and therefore there's no breida. And he would say there is a makim to be oiser in a scenario where, not like in the beginning where he writes that if the majority are goyim, majority owners are goyim, it's mutter. If the guy runs it, he says, but if you don't have all these conditions, the majority is goyim, and the bank is run by goyim, then you still have a problem. So he's a little bit more machmir than the Madam Shik, than the Madam Shik. So you have the Seder, the Maria Levi is the biggest makel. Then you come with the Sholom a little bit less, and then the Marasham. Then the Madam Shik on top of the Sholom and the Marasham. Each one added another layer, and the Shulchan Aruch is the biggest machmir. Yeah, and then you have the Minchas Pitim, which I didn't bring up. It's a very short piece. And he says that if the people who run the bank are goyim, so he makes it an interesting chiluk. The people who run the bank are goyim, so you're allowed to invest in the bank. Why? Because the one who runs the bank is doing a dak nafshei. He wants to generate profits for himself also. But the borrower is not allowed to borrow from such a bank. It becomes that the one who invests money, he's not over any issue. Why? Because he gave money to the bank. The bank is run by a guy. The guy is doing whatever he wants according to his own cheshbonos. So it's mutter. But if I'm a Jew and I am borrowing money from this bank where there's Yiddish money over there, then I am over an Isser. That's a piece of it. And then he says, no, we don't have to say, it's too extreme to say it. We have to say if the malve is not over, the loiva is also not over. And we're going to take a break now, and I guess we will be mamshich the shiur at a different time. Maybe we'll try to do it Sunday or Monday to finish the last part, which is what the Rebbe writes about it. So